I've been a PTE user for many years, but I've always used it in conjunction with Photoshop. Photoshop helps me to explore different techniques, and it can speed up certain tasks too. But most of the time it's the creative part of Photoshop that appeals to me. In this video I'm thinking about text and opening titles. If we wanted to animate individual letters within a title, that's not impossible within PTE. But if we use Photoshop, we can make things a little bit easier. Let's start with a short demo of what I have in mind. I've left the titles quite large in this demo, but that's easily changed via a frame, and we'll take a look at those too. Each of the letters in the word PTE AV Studio has been created individually. We can do that in Photoshop, and then they've been animated within PTE AV Studio to create the effects we're seeing. But of course, if we animate the letters and also the frame the letters occupy, then we can get some quite unusual and interesting effects. There's a fair bit of experimentation here, and we won't know exactly what we have until we press the play button. This one I thought worked particularly well. Once we have the basis of the animation complete, then to create the variation we only need to tweak some of the keyframes and see what effect we can achieve. As you can see, I have opened up Photoshop and I've created a new document, File, New. It's not important what color we have, but white is convenient so we can see any of the styles that we're going to apply to the text in a moment or two. Using the Type Text tool from the toolbar on the left, I've clicked into the surface and typed the title I wish to use. What do I mean by effects? Well, whenever Photoshop creates text, it always creates the text on a new layer. We're going to take advantage of that to do what we want to do, and if I turn off my white background, there we can see it floating on that checkerboard, which of course tells us that is transparent. What I'd like to do is to add some style to my text. Now we can do that by going down to the bottom of this window and clicking Effects. One of the options I want to add is a drop shadow, so if I select that, it'll come up with that already selected, but I still have all the other options here. The drop shadow looks okay to me. I'm going to live with what's come up on screen, but if I wanted to change it, I need to make sure this box is highlighted as it is here, and I've got all of the options here to make change. I want a slightly off-white, so I'm going to go to my color options. Looks like I've already got one. I must have used this last time I was using Photoshop, but I'll click the square. That's the sort of thing, maybe even a little darker, but we're all going to choose something different anyway. I'll click OK to that. We've got the opportunity to add bevel and emboss, but all I was really thinking about here is a little stroke line. So I'll tick the line, select it. I can see it's 3 pixels here on the inside. We've got to make a choice of where we want this line and how thick we want it. Let me put it on the outside and we'll take a look at that. I think that looks a little better. Again, it's all going to be personal, isn't it? Let's say we're happy with the styles we've applied. We actually don't need the white background anymore. So what we could do is just turn it off. Now we've got a choice. I want to rasterize this text. At the moment the text is fully editable as is all of the settings below. So I suppose we've got to make sure the text is how we want it. We've got the choice of keeping live text here in case we need it, or we can rasterize it. That's another personal choice. I'm going to rasterize it by going to the right clicking, and I'm going to choose rasterize type. You'll notice it doesn't rasterize all of the settings or the effects we put on. So if I go back and right click again, I can rasterize the layer style. Now what we've effectively done there is to turn our live text into an image or an object. We can't edit the text anymore, but that's exactly what we want. What we need here is a layer for every letter. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. I'm going to go for 12 layers, including the one we've got. So I've got to make 11 others. Why 12? Well, I'll have a letter on each layer, but I'll keep the whole thing just in case we need it. So with the text highlighted in layers, I can hit Ctrl J. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Did I say 11 or 12? We may have one too many. Who cares? We'll work that out in a few moments. I'm going to go and turn all of these off apart from the first one, because on this first layer, and I've just selected it, all I want on this layer is the letter P. Now to achieve that, if I select my rectangular marquee tool, I can select all the rest of the text and hit Ctrl X. There we have it. Now what we can do is, I think it may be useful if we turn this layer off and select the other one. There's no need to turn the layer off, but I think this makes it a little bit easier. Now we've got to take everything past the T. Now we can do that in the same way. Ctrl X will do that. But of course I also need the letter P removed just in front of the T. Ctrl X will do that, because on my first layer I want the P, the second layer I want the T. I've got to go up all of this list here, and I've got to leave myself with just one appropriate letter on each layer. Doesn't take too long, but I won't bore you by having you watch me do that. I'll cut the video here and I'll be back in a moment. As you make a selection and remove the letters you don't want for each of those layers, there's a couple of things you may notice. Let me start at the bottom here with the P, T, E, then the A and V. One of those is, of course, when you get here, you may have to choose a different selection tool, either the freehand lasso tool or the polygonal lasso tool, to go down between the A and the V. The other thing you may notice, if you're anything like me, that from time to time you turn a layer on, but maybe the one below is selected, so when you go to cut on this layer, nothing happens, but that happened to me a couple of times. You soon spot where you've gone wrong. But there, as I turn on each of these layers, we can see we've got now a letter on each layer, and finally right at the top, although you won't see anything when I turn it on unless I turn all these off first, there I've left one layer with the entire title I want to use. Now we need to export all of those layers to our slideshow folder. Now I'm going to do that by first turning them all on, so I'm only going to export the visible layers. I don't want the background. I'm going to go to File at the top left of the screen, choosing Export, and there's the command we want, Layers to Files. In this window we can choose where the images are going to be saved and what format to use. I've already got a folder prepared, so I need to locate that first, then I can choose a name. So I'll browse for that, and I'm working in my Pictures folder, and I'm working in a folder I've called Individual Letters, so I'll click OK to select that folder. I can put a file name in here if I want. I'll just call it letters. Here generally you'll find the default is likely to be JPEG. Make sure you select PNG 24. That's going to retain the transparent nature of all of these layers. I don't need to include the ICC profile, and by default you're going to have this box ticked. Now this option is an important choice for us. It's called trim layers, but I think we can think of this as a crop. If we choose not to trim or crop the images, the letters are going to appear like this. You can see that each of the letters will retain their position within the image boundaries. If we allow the images to be trimmed or cropped for us, then they're going to look like this. The difference between these two settings will affect the setup in PTE AV Studio and also how we can animate the letters. But what I'm going to do here is I'm going to export using both of these options, so when we get them into PTE we can actually see the difference. My first demonstration that you saw at the start of this video, the images were not trimmed. So here I'm going to start by unticking the box, and I'm going to click Run, and we'll see Photoshop do this in real time. It's taking each one of those layers and saving it independently to the folder of my choice, and once that's complete I'll reset that. I'll probably put the next set of images in a slightly different folder, but with the next option, there we are, it's all done. With the next option I'll choose the option to trim. Here we are in PTE AV Studio. Here you can see the letters that I exported untrimmed and a background I've got prepared, but the trimmed ones I put in a different folder. If I just double click that, you can see an instant difference straight away, and when I select the letter itself, well, you can see we've got a bit of work to do with that when we get into the objects and animation screen. For the moment, back to the individual letters. I'll click and drag my background image down, and we can open up the objects and animation screen. Now the benefit of those letters not being trimmed is going to help us now, because each letter occupies the right position to form the word. So I'm going to go up to my option at the top of the screen, just clicking the grey area to deselect my background image, but I'm going to select Import an image, and I'm going to import all of them together. I'll leave the complete word. I'm just going to take all 11 letters and click Open, and we'll instantly see the benefit. Now perhaps I can begin to demonstrate the difference between the untrimmed letters and the trimmed. In the untrimmed here, if I was to select the top option in the bottom on the bottom right and go to one of my rotate commands, you can see if I use rotate Y as an example that the P is not rotating on its own axis, so to speak. It's rotating within the image that we've created. Now let me use the magic of video and do the same thing with the trimmed letters. So I've done exactly the same here with the trimmed letters, and we can see the difference. We're going to need to adjust the size, and we're going to need to move every letter into a position to form the words. Now that's going to take a little longer, but it does change the animation. If I use the same rotation that I did a few moments ago for the letter P, now it's an individual letter. So if I go up to my rotate and I click and drag, you can see the letter rotates from the center of each letter, and that's going to make quite a difference to the animation. There's no better or worse, it's just different. Now I'm going to switch back to my untrimmed version because that was the version I used to create my demo. Now, as you can see in the bottom right corner, Photoshop does a great job of exporting all of those layers out to individual images. But it doesn't do a great deal with the labeling of them, so perhaps this is one of those times when we could make use of the properties above. I've got my letter P at the top of the stack, so if I go to my properties here and I click into the name, I could change that to the letter P. And if I go down the entire list, I could quickly and easily make them a little bit more visible in that bottom right corner. I'll carry on and do the rest of these. As you can see, it's only going to take a few seconds. Now we know that for any animation we want to put into these letters, we're going to need at least 2 keyframes. But we've got to retain the keyframe at the settings we've got it now, so that we've got the words all lined up together, PTE AV Studio. So I'm going to select the top layer in the right hand bottom corner. I'm going to hold the Shift key and select the bottom letter, the 11th letter, and we're going to need a bit of space at the bottom here. So if you move your cursor over the line here, we can drag that up, because I want to be able to see all of the keyframes over here on the left. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a copy of every one of these keyframes, and I'm going to clone it. So if I selected this one, I can hit the Alt and the Insert key to add the clone. If I then hit the down arrow, my cursor jumps down to the next one, and I can hit the Alt Insert, down arrow, and so on. And as you can see in real time, I got myself out of kilter there a little bit, trying to talk and do the finger work at the same time, but there you have it. In only a few seconds we've got now 2 lots of keyframes. One we can use to start the animation, but one is going to record where the text currently is. So I want to move them, so I can select them all together as well. I can use the Shift key for that too. Click the first one here, click the last one, and I can drag that to the right. We'll decide on timings in a moment or two. But now we've got a starting point and an end point. Now we can think about what sort of animation we want to place into each of these images, letters, layers, whatever we call them. We need to select them one at a time and apply the animation. Now this is the creative part, because there's no rights and wrongs here at all. I'm going to select the first keyframe, and just as an example, I'm going to use my controls over on the right hand side. I'll use my pan X to move the P over this side, and then I can select the T, and maybe I'll do much the same with that. I'll bring it over here, but also I'll bring it up to the top right corner. So you can see this is just flying by the seat of our pants. We decide exactly what we're going to do with the letters, and for something basic, that's all we need to do. Now I've just gone ahead and I've put some animation into each of those letters. I have only used the pan controls to do this. I've still got the opportunity to use zoom and rotate, and we've yet to think about adding all of these images to a frame. So all I've really got to do now is to decide how long do I need for all of these letters to form the words in the center of the frame. Well, just for the moment, let me select that keyframe, hold the Shift and select the one at the bottom, because I think we're probably going to need 4 or 5 seconds. Doesn't have to be pinpoint accurate. That will do. I'm going to put my cursor back at the start and we'll take a look at what I've just created here. And remember, this was just flying by the seat of my pants. I've got no formula here. I'm just trying it and seeing how it's going to look. So let me press play and we can look in the mini player. There's the animation coming from all points of the compass to form the word. Now that doesn't look unattractive, but there's a couple of problems here. When the words PTE AV Studio come to a stop at the 5-second point, we may not want the text to be quite that large, and we certainly need to add a little bit of speed here. If we're starting animation with objects, letters, images off screen, then the animation we're most likely to need from this keyframe to this keyframe is going to be slowed down. If we turn this on its head and we had the words on screen when the image opens and they burst away to the edges of the screen to take the text off the screen, then that's different. Then we're more likely to need accelerate. So what I've got to do now is to select each of these keyframes in turn for every single letter and apply the speed that I want. Unfortunately, at the present state of play with PTE AV Studio, I cannot select all of those keyframes and apply the speed to them all in one go. I wish I could, but we can't. But if I select one of these, even if I'm only using pan for the example I've got here, it would make sense, I think, if I go up here and put in my animation speed as slow down, that I follow through and I actually do it with zoom as well, but more importantly with rotate, because as we move forward with this and we try some other settings, if we do decide to use rotate, which we almost certainly will, then we've already got the speed in place. So we've only got to do this one little tedious exercise once, and I'll go ahead and do that for the remaining letters. So I've added the speed to all the letters. Let's press play and take a look, and we'll notice that it all comes to a stop very gently at the end of the animation. But of course I may not want my text quite so large, and I may want it lying along the edge of the horizon there. So to do that, we can introduce a frame. If we knew we was going to use a frame at the start of this exercise, we could have created one in the bottom right corner, right-clicked the frame and added all of the images as children of the parent in this case being the frame. But it happens quite often, I find, that we don't think of this until a little bit later, but it's no problem at all. If I go to the bottom right corner and click into this grey area to lose all of the selections, I can right click and I can add a frame. If I then select all of my letters using that shift click method, I can right click and cut them, select the frame and paste them in. Now I'd like to see the keyframe of the frame we've just created in conjunction with the letters. They're already selected, we can see them over on the left hand side. If I hold my control key and click the frame on the right hand side, then we can see the keyframe that's just been created on the left. What I'd like to do here is to add exactly the same speed options that we added before. So I'm going to go to my pan, add a modifier, slow down. I'll include the zoom and also rotate. Then I need to clone that keyframe. Alt insert will do that, and I'll move that one to my 5-second point, because at that point I want my text slightly smaller and I'd like it sitting along the horizon. So I'm going to put my cursor into the zoom box and I'll use the down arrow to reduce the size of the text just a little bit, then my cursor in the pan Y and use the up arrow to push it down. You can see we've got a boat right on the horizon there, so if I had a convenient little spot, I may even decide to put my cursor in the pan and maybe try to view the boat through one of the gaps, but the only way I think I can do that is to move my text way up here, and maybe that's a little bit too far. So on this occasion I'll double click Pan X. I'll live with that in the center. Coming back to the start then, let's have a look at how that looks with our new found frame and position and size of the text. And that seems to be working pretty well. When I was putting together my demonstration at the start of this video, when I got to this point, I went to the top right and closed down the objects and animation screen. I then selected this image and used Ctrl+C and Ctrl+V to make an absolute copy of it. Then I could select the second, go back into the objects and animation screen. I had the opportunity to select my background image, then go to my properties, and using this option I could change the picture. But on this occasion, all I want to suggest is if we go back to the animation tab and we go back to our letters, this is where we can go back to each of these in turn. I'll leave the frame as it is at the moment, so just the letters. Remember, we spread them out, but now maybe we can experiment by adding some of the rotate options in there. And we can mix and match. We can use rotate C, we can use rotate Y, we can use rotate X. Well, you try setting all of these to something like I've just done there, and then check to see how it looks. Now I've gone ahead and made some random changes into all those keyframes, so let's press play and we can see how that's affecting the animation we first created. Not bad, it's not massively different from the first one. So what we could do now is exactly the same as before. We could go to close the objects and animation screen, make sure we save our project file so the work we've got underway here is safely stored on our computer. Then we can copy that and come back and try something different. Now what may we want to do with the frame? If I select the frame once again, I can see the start and end keyframes. The end keyframes needs to be more or less at that point, doesn't it? But this one doesn't. This one could be anywhere. Let me bring this up here so I can see it. Just going to put it there temporarily, because what we can think about doing here maybe is panning that out to the left and up to the right. Just a simple pan. Let's put that back. So if we think about what's happening here, we've got animation that's happening within our frame, but now we've got the frame animated too. Let's have a look at what that's doing to the text. Now we just need a little bit of experimentation. We can select that first keyframe of our frame and we can put any changes into this that we see fit. And every time we do, we press play and we can see the effect it has on our text. So I don't think I can really take this much further, because we can make a change to any one of those first keyframes and we're going to make a difference to how the text is animated. So once again, with the magic of technology, I'm going to switch to the text which contained the letters that we trimmed. Now when we do the same thing with the trim letters, why do they look so big in PTE AV Studio's objects and animation screen? Well, PTE tries to fit our images to the slideshow size, and these trimmed or cropped images are far smaller than the previous images we were using. All we need to do is select them all and set them back to 100%, the size they were created. So what we need to do here is to go to the bottom right, select the top layer, which should be our letter P. There it is. Hold the Shift key and select the last layer, but not including the background. Then I can go to the left hand side and select the top keyframe, and again holding the Shift key, the bottom. Then if we go to the top right to the zoom, I can right click over the X or the Y and I can select original. Now all I need to do is to spend just a little time, because this time we've got to arrange the letters into the words that we created, and we can do that with the pan, simply moving them into position. Now, as you can see by the turning round of the screen, I've gone ahead and done that, and I've renamed the images and created the keyframes exactly as we did before. Now we can do that experimentation with the animation, and if we find something interesting, we can save the project file, we can copy the image and then make a derivative of the copy. Let's have just a quick recap to finish. With the keyframes that I've got at the 5-second point, that gives us the word PTE AV Studio nicely settled in the center of the frame. The keyframe here is exactly the same as before, and all I've done is I've used the options on the right. As you can see, I've used pan and I've used some rotate Y to put all of the letters to the left and right and around the screen. So when I press play, the result that I've created is something like this. And as you can see by the gentle way everything came to a stop, I've also added the appropriate speed too. If you look up at the top right, you can see that I've used the animation speed smooth for pan, zoom and rotate. So I've created something which I think is got some reasonable interest. So the next stage is for me to close the objects and animation screen and make a copy of what I've done and then make some changes to the animation. Here you can see in the slide list I've got a number of images, because what I did was to create the animation I've just shown you in the objects and animation screen. If we hit Ctrl C and Ctrl V, it will make a copy, or we can use right click and choose copy from here and paste. Once we've got a copy, then we can go back into the objects and animation screen, go to that first keyframe and make adjustments to the animation, and when we have something that's satisfactory we can move on. And I had a bit of time on my hands, as you can see. We're all locked down with this virus, so last night I went through and I created these. So I'm going to finish off this video by showing you all of these strung together with just a little bit of music. Oops. Come along to my website and you can download all these effects as slide styles. You can then import them and apply them, and you can use what you see as a reference. The objects and animation screen will show all of the artwork just as you saw in the video. If you've been watching this video on YouTube, can I encourage you to subscribe to my channel? And if you hit that notification bell, you'll be informed whenever I put up new content. I'll see you next time.